Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We really are excited that you've joined us today, and we hope that this time together will be beneficial for you. What we'd like to do is just go through some tips for writing the grant application for the Technology Foundation grant process. And we're going to go through several different things that we hope will be beneficial to you as you move through this process. But before we do that, we thought we would just give you a little bit of background on the foundation in case you are not familiar with us. We generate and distribute funds to support technology programs throughout Region 12. These are very primarily focused on increasing academic achievement among students throughout the region. We do have one annual funding cycle, and we are governed by a volunteer board that is made up of community and education leaders throughout the area. So who can apply for the grant? We have several different ways that you can apply for a grant. Through Region 12, we have individual grants or teams. You need to be employed by a school district or a charter school that is served by our region. And all of the projects and all of those that apply need to be involved in direct instruction of students or related support services that benefit the students in the service area of Region 12. All of the instructional projects that are eligible for funding through the foundation are designed to begin next school year, and they need to meet the selection criteria. And what we're going to do is go through that selection criteria and then go through the grading matrix in particular so that you can understand how things will be graded as we go through the process. Funds that you apply for can be used for technology instruction and classroom materials. You can use them for equipment. They can also be used for experiential learning, any kind of activity or materials that support higher levels of education through the use of technology. So handheld technology, but it doesn't have to be specific to things like computers, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The award amounts for the grants, you'll see these in your guidelines. It can be up to $5,000 awarded to an individual teacher, or up to $10,000 if you have a campus team that wants to work together to apply for a grant or a project. The number of awards that we give annually varies, and it depends upon the amount of funds that we have available and also the nature of the grants that are worth funding and that merit funding through our award process. So let's talk a little bit about the grant timeline. Applications are going to be due in late January. Refer to your guidelines for that specific date. We do have a team that comes together to review the grants and score them. That happens at the first part of February. And this team is made up of not only educators, but members of the community that are business leaders. And I mentioned that to you specifically because I want you to pay attention to the language that you use in your grant application and make certain that you're not using education terms that would be limited to educators in terms of people being able to understand them. So avoid the use of acronyms, or if you feel like you need to use an acronym, just make certain that you're explaining that in your grant application. Winners will be announced by April 1st, and the selection process that we go through with that team of reviewers is a blind process. So no one will know that it's your application that is being reviewed, and because of that, we want to make certain that you avoid the use of anything in your application that would divulge the name of your school district, the name of your school, or any particular individual on your staff. We also use an objective rubric and a scoring matrix as part of our process. This guide is available to you and can be downloaded through the website, and we will be going through that today so that you can understand the point system and how each question will be graded. So now let's take a look at the key steps. There's basically 5 steps in this process, and in the application it's fairly straightforward, but we're just going to run through those very quickly. The first step is to really talk about the importance of your project and to identify that unmet need. The second thing is to really focus on the objectives. What is your strategy as you move through your project? What are the tactics that support your overall project goal? As you're thinking about your unmet need, what are the ways in which you think you can address that unmet need through this specific project? Then you're going to want to really detail your project activities. This will not be an in-depth detail, but more of a timeline and the key activities that will take place throughout your project during the school year. Then you're going to move to the evaluation section, and this will mirror your objectives. This will be the way that you'll measure your success. So how will you know if your project has been successful? How will you know that there has been an impact because of the project that you're implementing there in your district? And then the last one is the budget. And that is really just where you're going to be detailing the expenses related to implementing the project and any of the specific supplies that will be needed for you to implement that project. So now let's go into a little bit of detail about each one of these particular areas. So as we look at the unmet need, this is really where you're going to be, this is your case statement, if you will. This is where you're really going to be proving the importance of your project. And if you look at your guidelines, the selection criteria basically states that this is the area, the degree to which your proposal is going to support your campus improvement plan or your district improvement plan, and that it will be addressing a specific area of need. And this is something that we would like for you to be able to substantiate by data. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It's not necessary for you to provide a lot of data. It's just important that it be substantiated by data. This is also the degree to which the student academic performance is emphasized. We want to make sure that that is a focus area. That is a primary objective for the Technology Foundation, is academic performance, and making certain that achievement is a key focus area. This application question, this criteria is in reference specifically to questions 1, 2, and 5. There are 35 possible points for this area, and we'll talk about each one of those individually. So the first thing that you want to do is agree on the problem. And so you want to start by identifying that specific need. There may be stakeholders that can help you define the problem that you're looking at addressing, and it may be that those are folks that are fellow staff members, it may be that they're parents, it may be that they're other members of your community, but you want to be sure that you're able to describe the impact of the problem and then provide some concrete evidence of the problem and the causes. If you are able to provide 1 or 2 pieces of data to substantiate that, that will be very helpful in articulating your case. And then you also want to make certain that you focus on how is this proposed project providing a solution that aligns with your campus or district improvement plan. The next thing that you want to do is just describe briefly what it is that you hope to achieve through the project. You know, what is your goal of the project? So let's talk about some specific, one specific example that articulates this. This example we're going to follow through the course of this workshop, and it's just one grant application that was articulated particularly well, and that we like to use as a way to show you, to demonstrate an example, but it's not something that you have to copy or feel like you have to do, that you have to model yours exactly after. It's just that this is a great example and it articulates it well. So if you look at this particular example, it says, we are seeking a grant to expand our Read to Success program with the objective of helping 5th grade at-risk students increase their reading skills and to read at grade level. So the next step then is to identify the key outcomes, and you can see that in this example, by the end of the year, the students are going to double their reading speed and improve their reading skills by 1 to 2 grade levels. So you can see that this is very clearly articulated. You can see very quickly what the goal of the project is and what the outcomes are. So what is the solution that they're hoping to achieve, and it's clearly articulated there. And so the next and final piece of that then is to be sure that you're setting realistic and achievable outcomes. So the rubric that's attached to this for questions 1 and 2, you can see that question 1 is that the project rationale is clearly stated, and the highest possible range of points for that is 7 to 10 points. And that's obviously what you're shooting for. And then you can see that question 2 is alignment with campus and district plan. And the way that the folks that will be reviewing the grants will look at this is that the stated need is consistent with your district strategic plan. And so I know that some of your plans are long. We don't want you to attach that, but what you can do is pull out a phrase perhaps from your district strategic plan or your campus improvement plan that will support your project, and then again articulate how you're addressing that need through this project or part of that need. The last question is question 5, and you can see that that's the benefit to students and staff. That has a possible of 15 points that can be earned there. And this is just really where you're able to identify the positive impact on the identified district needs, that is certain and that it's clearly outlined, showing the benefits to students and staff. So with this section of the grant application, writing tips for success, you remember that this is your first impression of your project. So you really just want to make it count. Again, you want to write this particular grant to communicate, not to impress. It's really important just to get to the point and make sure that you're clearly articulating what the point of your project is, what is the unmet need that you're trying to address, and how is your project a solution to that. Again, because we have some reviewers for these grant applications that are not educators, don't assume that your reviewer understands your proposal or will understand any of the words that you're using in there that might be specific to education. So you want to make it as plain as you can and as simple as you can. It is okay for you to use bullet points to emphasize your key points to fit within the keyword limit, and make sure that as you're addressing these questions that you're answering only the information that's being specifically requested. Those are some things that will be helpful to you when it comes to time for the reviewers to review the grant. The next step is the objectives, and that's really where you're going to be focusing on the goals for your project and the strategy that you'll be using to implement that. So you want to make sure that every objective that you list supports your overall project goals. The selection criteria that relates to this particular section of the grant application is the one that's related to student academic performance and the degree to which it is emphasized within your project. We also want to make sure that your project is very clear and logical. Again, I just want to emphasize that your case statement needs to be clear and specific. It doesn't need to be wordy, and it doesn't need to be fancy language. It just needs to be very logical and clear with specific objectives. This relates specific to question 3, and you can see that this has 20 possible points attached to it. It's 1/5 of the project, of the goal, of the grant application, excuse me. A project goal is only going to be as good as the objectives that go with it. So you really want to make sure that you're focusing on SMART goals. These are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So again, you want to focus on outcomes, not necessarily the process. You want to make certain that you're looking at what is the result of this project going to be and who is the target audience that's being served. And make sure that everything that you're doing with this project is realistic and that it can be accomplished within the school year. These grant periods are typically for 1 year. We haven't had any that have exceeded that. And so you want to make certain that whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish can be accomplished within that school year. As I mentioned, these grants will be for the time period that begins next school year. And so you will have a full school year to do that. However, the evaluations are typically due in April. And so you may be 90% complete. If you are a grant award winner, you may be 90% complete by the time that you're requested to submit your evaluation. So let's just look at a SMART objective example. Using that same example that we talked about a moment ago, 5th grade students will double their reading speed and increase their reading skills 1 to 2 grade levels by the end of the school year. You can see that in this example, it's very specific. We know that it's 5th grade students. We know exactly how much their reading speed will be increasing, and we know exactly what the goal is in terms of their academic increase, in terms of academic performance. It is very measurable. You can see where they've identified that it will double in speed and that we are hoping that it will improve their reading level skills 1 to 2 grade levels. So again, SMART goals, very simple, very plainly stated. It's attainable and realistic, and it's time bound. So it's by the end of the school year. So this is just a very simple example of an objective that you can use as a reference point as you're writing your grant. Looking at the rubric that's attached to this particular question, you can see that again, 20 possible points here. These are what the grading committee is going to be looking at, is that the objectives have been defined and they're clearly defined and attainable, and that everything that is related to educational outcomes is stated and it is measurable. Writing tips for success with regard to objectives. Again, no need to write flowery, colorful statements. Just be matter of fact about what it is that you're trying to accomplish through this particular project. You want to make certain that when you're writing your objectives that you're tying it back to the identified need. So always keep the unmet need in your case statement in mind as you're writing the application. You want to make sure that you're including all of your relevant groups and your target population within the context of what you're writing, and make sure that you've allowed plenty of time to accomplish your objectives in the application timeline in terms of the project implementation. The last few things is that you want to make sure that you're not confusing your objectives with your methods, and you want to make sure the most important thing is that you figure out early on how you're going to measure the change that's projected in each objective. So when you're thinking about your goals, think about your measurement at the same time. Is there a way for you to clearly measure that? It doesn't have to be a complex way to measure it, but is there a way that you can measure it to where you're really going to be able to determine if you've had some impact? Because that will be something that is important in the evaluation process, and I'll talk a little bit about why the evaluation process is so important to the foundation in a moment. And then you want to make sure on that same note with regard to evaluation that you're allowing enough time for evaluation to take place. And what we encourage everyone in the foundation is that you begin your evaluation process at the beginning of your project. So you begin with the end in mind. As you start your project, if there's any way to do any kind of a pre-test or an early evaluation benchmark that then you can measure from as you go along, that sometimes will help the evaluation process be a little bit more efficient and not so burdensome on the back side of the project. That's just what we've observed over the years as we've worked with winners in the past. As you move through to the implementation section, this section is very straightforward. Should not take a long time for you to complete this section. This is primarily just where you're going to be giving us an outline of how your project will be implemented, the detailed timeline for that, and your project plan. The criteria that's attached to that is the degree to which your proposal is clear and logical, and this is just the clarity of the description of your instructional approach, your methods, or your treatment. And I'll give you a very specific example of that. This particular area in this question is worth, it's related to question 4, and it's worth 10 points. And this is basically just where you're going to be designing your program. So this is where you're going to be defining the focus of the project, what are the steps involved, and the procedures for how it's going to take place. And you want to explain all those steps to accomplish your project, and then describe how those connections are made between the objectives and the method. So let's look at an example of that. You can see here that for this particular project, this applicant has chosen to place a chart for their response to this question. And they've shown just the key activities that are going to take place throughout the year, and then the target dates for that. And this has been identified by months. It may be that your project is shorter in duration or may have fewer benchmarks or fewer steps, and that's fine. It just depends upon the depth of the project and the key steps that are involved. It may have fewer, it may have more, it doesn't matter. What's important, that part doesn't matter as much as just being able to clearly articulate the steps that are involved, when they're going to take place, and making certain that all of those things tie back to your objectives. Okay, The rubric that is attached to this, again, question 4, you can see here that what they're looking for is that your methods are research-based and they're instructionally sound, and that the benchmarks have been clearly defined, and that you have a timeline that's clearly stated with realistic dates, and that your activities are linked to a timeline. For this section, you just really want to, again, this is a great place to be mindful of your reader once again. This is a place where we've seen folks get tripped up on educational, or there's been a tendency to use educational terms that have not been clearly understood by the reader. So you want to make sure when you're looking at your timeline and the steps for completing your project that you focus on colloquial language, language that, or at least simple language that can be understood by a reader regardless of whether they're an educator or a business professional, and that you're using direct statements with active voice. The next section is really around innovation. This is something that's very important to the Foundation Board. We're looking for creative use of educational techniques in the classrooms and creative ways to engage students in the classroom. And so this part of the application is really focused on creative or innovative ways that you're approaching your objectives. And we're also interested in if this project is able to be sustained after your grant funds have been used. This particular part of the grant application relates to questions 6 and 7, 15 possible points. And this is really where you're going to be describing how your project is unique and innovative. You want to ask yourself these questions and then be able to answer them. Is this a new or a unique teaching method that you're using? Maybe this is an innovative approach to engaging students, and if so, how is it unique? We've seen folks use the virtual reality types of approach to teaching recently. We've seen creative use of distance learning that has been very innovative and effective in engaging students, but there may be some unique project idea that you have around that, around another idea. And so whatever your imagination can come up with, the Technology Foundation Board is very interested in exploring new and exciting ways to engage students, whatever that looks like, and how can technology be a part of that learning experience for those students. We want you to be able to clarify for us in this section whether the project is able to continue after grant funds are used. It's important for us to know that, and if so, what is the plan for sustaining the project? And looking at the rubric for this, again, questions 6 and 7, you can see here that it's very focused on project innovation, that the creativity is clearly stated, and whether or not it's sustainable and will continue. You can see that that can earn up to 5 points if your sustainability plan is clearly stated. The next section is around the evaluation. It's focused on the evaluation, and again, this is really where you're going to be focused on the means of measuring the success of your project, and this will tie directly back to your goals. The selection criteria is the degree to which sound evaluation procedures are incorporated into the proposal. The question is question 8, and there are 15 possible points to this section. Again, this is really where you want to just be focusing on how you're going to measure and record the results of your work. So if you think about your goals at the beginning, how is it that you're going to be able to measure what you're hoping to achieve? What tools might you use to measure that effectively? And when do you think you're going to be seeing results? There could be several different times during your project that you might be measuring your impact and your progress with your project. It may be that it's just at the beginning. It may be the beginning and the end. It may be that it's just at the end. The important thing is that you articulate that clearly and you articulate the tools that you're going to be utilizing in order to accomplish that. And you really want to focus on the end results. We have had some projects that we understand that you're projecting your success and you're projecting what you hope your impact will be. And we understand that there are times when you start a project and you implement a project and it doesn't achieve the impact that you originally hoped it would achieve. Perhaps you think that you're going to have more students that can participate, and then you find out that you have a limited number of students that are able to participate. Or maybe you hope that there are a number of staff that are going to be able to benefit from the project, and it ends up being either more or less than what you originally projected. Being exactly on point with your projections is not really as important as being able to clearly articulate what you hope to achieve and then being able to articulate what you in fact were able to achieve. The reason that we really focus on the evaluations and we want to hear from you how well your project, the results came through, or what the impact of your project ends up being ultimately, is that we will then carry that information back to our donors and hopefully inspire them to continue to contribute to the foundation so that we can in turn provide additional dollars for more grants to be funded in our schools, and also so that we can convey the great creative work that you are doing in your classrooms and show them the innovative learning that is taking place and how we're engaging students in a new and unique way through the use of technology. But it's extremely important for us to have that information so that we can carry that to our donors and hopefully encourage more people to support the work of the foundation. So that's one reason why we focus on the evaluation from the beginning, and we encourage you to begin with the end in mind. It's not so much about hitting, all of those marks that you said you were going to be able to hit. It's more about being able to articulate the impact at the end of the day and how is this really making a difference in learning. So let's just look at an example of an effective project evaluation. Standardized reading text, you can see that they conducted those at the start of their program and then again at the end. So they had a pre-test and a post-test for this particular project. And they wanted to determine what were the increases in reading speed. In this particular example, they also chose to include students that had ADD, and they wanted to test them to just determine if they had increased reading attention rates as well. So, but you can see that in 2 very brief sentences, they were able to clearly articulate how they were going to be implementing their evaluation and what the goals of those particular pre and post tests included. The scoring rubric related to this is question A, and you can see that what you have a possibility of earning 15 points here, and that the evaluation component is clearly built into the project and the methods are clearly stated, and that there are specific activities that are identified. That part is underlined because that is a really critical part of the scoring piece that we have seen over and over. We've seen our grant evaluation team look for those specific activities, and they really want those to be clearly identified. So just spend some time focusing on that in particular. If you are selected as a winner or a grant recipient, you will be invited to attend a Winner Circle event. We typically host that in April, and it's a luncheon. And at that time, we will also go over in more detail, just as a reminder, the evaluation procedures, and we'll talk a little bit about that so that you can keep that in mind as you begin your project. We will also give you your official checks at that time. When the grants are originally or initially awarded, those are not included with that award. It's just simply a celebration, and then we give everyone their checks at one time during that luncheon, which will happen, as we said, in April. So the very last piece of the grant application is simply the budget piece, and this is where you're going to be taking your project and breaking it down into the costs and supplies that you'll need to implement your project. And it's important that this be done in detail. You want to make certain that, and you can see that in the application, it's a chart. It's a fairly self-explanatory chart, very simple, but you want to make certain that your budget is complete. You want to itemize each particular component of your project. And really the thing that I want to focus on the most in this particular section is that you want to prioritize the items that you need in your project. So if you have 5 or 6 items that are required for your project, but you have 2 or 3 that are critically important to implementing your project, you want to make certain that they are placed in priority order. And why do I mention that? We have had, on occasion, some projects that are funded partially and not funded in their entirety. And so when the committee is looking at a project that may merit partial funding but perhaps will not merit full funding, they will look at the budget and determine how much they're funding based on those priority items and how they're listed. So you want to make certain that you're listing those items that are the most important at the top. You also want to be realistic with your supplies request. Include everything that you need, but we ask you not to include things like paper clips and other things that would be average supplies that you would have in your district or on hand in your district anyway. And then you want to make certain that all of your budgets meet the funding requirements, and those are included in your guideline. When you look at the rubric attached to this, again, just 5 points for this section, but it's important for you to have a budget that's complete and that all of your items are listed in priority order, and that there's enough detail on that budget that the funding committee can clearly understand what it is that you're requesting through your funding, and that it's enough that they can understand what the item actually is. So just a few other minor things that we'll go through here as a few last words of advice. As with any grant application, you want to make certain that you're reading and following the directions. You want to make sure that you're creating a plan, not just a proposal. And really what I'd like to say about that in particular is that if you can think about just painting a picture for the committee of why this project is so important and what is the unmet need, how is this going to help your students learn something important, something unique, and engage them in an innovative way that might change the way that they're learning about science or math or learning to read or engaging in fine arts, whatever it is that your plan is focusing on. You want to make sure that you're trying to paint a picture for them. Be succinct. Again, you're able to use bullets if you want to. There's not going to be any negative, no one's going to think negatively of your application if it's written in bullet form, as long as it's clear. There is a word limit on each question, so you want to make sure you're clear, but you're perfectly welcome to use bullets if it's effective to do so. I would encourage you to ask someone to read your application after you've completed it, and it doesn't have to be an educator. Just ask someone to read it for you and give you feedback on that before you submit it. We do ask that you proofread it. This will help you reduce redundancy and grammatical errors. Please do not copy and paste the same answer from one question to another question. Please find something else to tell us about your project. If it's a similar answer, then I would encourage you to think about if there's some other aspect to the project that will help you paint a clearer picture about your project, rather than copying and pasting a similar answer that you had for one question to a future question. Please focus on things that are unique, projects that can be sustained, and things that perhaps will provide your students with a unique or special experience that they might not otherwise have in the classroom. Those are the types of projects that tend to catch the eye of the review committee. Because we have limited funds, those projects that tend to rise to the top are those that have that aspect to them of creativity, things that look like an exciting way to learn for students and that demonstrate something unique and new. If you are not selected for a grant award, we don't want you to be discouraged. We would like for you to use this opportunity to build your grant writing skills, but also, perhaps there are other organizations that you can submit a grant application to. We have had many grant applicants who have not received a grant award the first time around, and then they applied again and received an award. We've had some folks who have had multiple awards given, some school districts who have received more than one grant award. So if you will just continue to submit your grant applications, we want you to use this experience and be able to benefit from it, but we don't want you to be discouraged. If you have any questions, you can contact Jennifer, and her number and contact information are there on the screen. And I'll turn it over to her at this time. She wants to share with you some results from last year. And if you have some questions, we'll go to that in a little bit.
Thank you, Jeannie. So one of the things we ask for, and I check in with the winners throughout the year, just reminding them to collect data, collect pictures, video. This past year, we really collected more pictures and video than we have in the past, either through social media or them sending those pieces in email. And it is just so impactful for our donors, for our board, our staff to see. We invite our staff to support the foundation. So I wanted to give you a quick example of what's been submitted this past year.
As you're talking, just listen. Don't get up and walk. Hey, welcome to historic Jamestown. In 1607, this permanent English settlement in North America was founded right here at Jamesport, which is what you're looking at. Okay? I'm going to take you to Captain John Smith. Okay, so this is John Smith. He was the leader of Jamestown, and they've put up a monument there at Jamestown, Florida. Okay, this is back to the James River. Okay, and the river flows in from the ocean, so that river has some salt water in it, but the people of Jamestown didn't know that it had that much salt water. Yes, totally. It's not the Mississippi River, it's the James River coming from the ocean. We're not going to walk. No. Okay, here's the seawall. They had to build this to protect the James Fort.
Okay, just a few other pieces I wanted to mention. Jeannie Marie talked about the grants not having to include handheld technology. We're really looking for innovative strategies that utilize technology to design those learning experiences for any and all student groups. That might include software, virtual technology, hardware, maker spaces, drones, robots, rockets, any of those pieces that are going to impact student engagement and or performance. You know, we had a unique project last year, and Jeannie, help me if I'm forgetting any piece of it, but the whole district wanted to purchase software, a behavior management software that teachers could use across campuses to track behavior and then the intervention that was occurring for those students. The goal was to decrease the time spent on behavior management, increase that learning time, and keep everyone who's involved current on the measures and intervention that was taking place. So that's different, but they were still using technology to impact learning. Our website, www.esc12.net/tech, has a lot of good resources, the grant deadline, the grading rubric, evaluation summaries of grants completed in the last few years. Those summaries, I think, will be very helpful to you. It includes the lessons that they learned after they completed the grant. One thing that sometimes is brought up is they wish that they would have, had more discussion with their principal or technology support, just because that impacts a successful implementation. And then one of our recipients said that he actually utilized this training while he was completing the application to ensure that he really was including all those suggestions. Grant applications will not be accepted through email, and you want to make sure you have ample time to obtain the superintendent's signature, technology, principal, and so forth. If dropping off, you want to be sure to check our office hours and not let that last day come and then risk a conflict coming up that keeps you from dropping the application off. And we did have that one year where somebody was on their way the day of the deadline, and then a family emergency came up and they weren't able to submit the application. And we know you guys work hard on those, so we don't want that to happen. Does anyone have any questions? You are all ready to submit a winning grant application.
Yeah, and thank you so much for bearing with us. We know this is a fairly dry, it's a fairly dry process and a fairly dry workshop. We just thought if we could go through each thing and just kind of articulate to you or share with you some things that we've seen that have worked well in other applications, and to really help you understand what is it that the committee is looking for in each answer. That might be helpful to you. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Jen through this process. And again, I just want to re-emphasize that what she mentioned to you about the summaries that are online and also looking at that scoring rubric, I think both of those things, I agree with her that those are both very helpful tools to look at and to just maybe reference as you're completing your grant application.
Okay, we wish you all the best of luck. Thank you for attending this presentation.